Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man's aunt passes away and leave him items that's wanted by more than just collectors. So, what item is passed down in your family? Because mine's is the Soundless Lady.
My Aunt Rachel practically raised me. After a lengthy battle with a terminal illness, she passed last year, leaving what little she had left after the hospital bills were paid. I was to take care of her cockatiel parrot, Tugboat, and her collection of 50s cartoon-themed collective plates. Basically, the only two items that couldn't be easily sold at an auction. If you saw the plates, you'd see why. Downright creepy things. One in particular, a plate portraying a young cartoon girl feeding apples to a giant frog. It's like the whole thing was made by two different people. The girl looked positively Disney, while the frog was more, uncomfortably realistic. It was such an odd item that there had to be a collector looking for it somewhere. I was sure of it. Yet for weeks, I couldn't find anyone even remotely interested. I posted pictures of the plate on pretty much every social media account I had, along with a few auction sites. But there were no takers. There were no markings or stamps indicating year or brand, unlike the other plates. And I was starting to think it was custom made. I couldn't stand looking at it. So I put it in a box in the garage. The others went up on my kitchen wall. My aunt would have wanted it that way. I live in a house not too far from the lake, on the outskirts of a small Minnesota town. There are a few houses in the nearby area, but I couldn't even hit the closest neighbor's yard with a rock if I tried. There's only a single streetlight that works outside, and that thing is flimsier than our summer weather. I rarely have any visitors, as this place can be a bit too out of the way even for my friends to come by. I inherited this place from my mom, and who passed away when I was younger. I'm one of the lucky house owners of my generation, but at what cost? My aunt's bird, Tugboat, fit right in. It was easy for me to fix him a big cage in one of the back rooms. When you're living on your own in a place like this, you got more space than you know what to do with. My aunt's funeral was simple. She'd insisted she paid for it herself, so it had to be as basic and cheap as could be. She hated the thought of ever being a burden, and she practically begged me to take care of Tugboat. You don't say no to that. You just don't. Besides, that bird was damn near the only thing that kept me sane through the COVID pandemic. Having lived in an empty house, you learn to identify most sounds around the property. The hum of the fuse box, the buzzing kitchen lights, the noise from the fridge against the backdrop of a TV that's been on way too long without anyone watching. This was the only reason I ever really took notice, that one night when this all started. I was turning on my electric toothbrush one night, only to notice it was completely silent. The motor was running, I felt the vibrations, and I saw it spin, but there was no sound. Not a peep. Yet, I could still hear the TV in the other room just fine. Over the next few days, there were several of these odd instances. Once, the egg timer went off, but didn't make a sound, causing me to overboil my breakfast. I thought the ventilation was broken once, but it turned out to have just gone quiet. Hell, at one point I dropped one of my aunt's collective plates. It shattered against the ceramic tiles, yet didn't make any noise. I was starting to think I was going deaf, but the two doctors I spoke to confirmed my hearing was just fine. Still, the mental image of seeing that falling plate and expecting a loud crash, only for it to remain silent, there was something eerie to it. A friend of mine, Patrick, works for the sheriff's department. We usually had lunch once a week to catch up, but that tradition teetered off during the pandemic. This time, I met him at the supermarket, but barely even noticed him. I had been having trouble sleeping and getting to work on time, as my alarm clock sometimes stayed silent for no apparent reason. My boss wasn't too happy, so I had to start using a vibration alarm. Patrick elbow bumped me by the fruit aisle, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Hey there," he said, grabbing a handful of oranges. "You doing okay?" "Yeah, sorry, didn't see you there." "These are crazy times," he said. "I heard about Rachel. I'm sorry I couldn't make the funeral." That's okay, I nodded. She never was much for men in uniform. Patrick laughed. We went our separate ways and finished our shopping, only to meet in the parking lot outside. We'd managed to park next to each other without even realizing it. He leaned against the hood of his car. Hey, have you seen any strangers around? After this year, you all seem like strangers. You know what I mean, he chuckled. Strangers, passers-by. No, sorry, I don't get out much. Some of your neighbors have had problems. Be careful. Problems? He looked at me like a deer in headlights. You don't know? Apparently there'd been reports of a thief. First, they thought it was raccoons, as someone had gone through the trash cans. But raccoons don't try to pick locks. They also don't leave food behind, or human-sized handprints on the windows. Some people had reported seeing a woman with tangled hair roam about, but the police hadn't managed to find her. This is what made me start looking more closely at my own property. I had noticed the garbage can lid gone missing, but I hadn't given it much thought. Also, I could have sworn there were handprints on my car one dewy morning. I tried to tell myself that it was all paranoia, but after what Patrick said, it seemed that everything was a clue, or a warning. In my mind, the strange woman was lurking behind every corner. I tried to put it out of my mind. One night, as I heard Tugboat sing his interpretation of Earth, Wind and Fire's September, I took an extra long shower. As I was scrubbing my hair clean, my head went quiet. I could feel the water touching my skin, but it made no sound. Through the door, I could still hear the bird sing his heart out. You'd be surprised how cold, warm water can feel when you've got ice in your veins. I rinsed off most of the shampoo and stepped out. There's a small frosted glass window in my bathroom. The silhouette of a pale face was pressed against it. I screamed, but no sound came out. Tugboat kept singing in the other room, unaware. I grabbed my robe and ran into the kitchen to call Patrick, but I couldn't hear anyone pick up on the other end of the line. I couldn't hear my own words when I spoke. And there, just outside the kitchen window, was the silhouette of an intruder trying to find their way in. A pair of unevenly sized eyes stared at me, slightly too far apart. As our eyes met, she bolted, probably heading for the back door. I picked up my keychain. Tugboat stopped singing from the other room, as he sensed something was wrong. As my hearing returned, I could hear the comforting sound of sharp metal from my kitchen knife as I pulled it from a drawer. My pulse was running away from me. It is one thing to think of a home invasion, but to live it violates every thought of privacy and safety you have. It was turning real fast. There was a large sliding glass door leading out to the backyard, and I figured if there ever came an intruder, it'd be through there. The same room where Tugboat chirped away, but now he'd gone quiet. I ran in there, still fresh out of the shower, my knife held in a cramped, forced grip. I almost convinced myself that I was ready to use it. There she was, just outside the door, pale, with unkempt hair, eyes of different sizes, slightly too far apart, dressed in what looked like a hospital gown. She was malnourished and frail, but something told me she had the strength of a madwoman. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching for something. As they landed on me, she opened her wide mouth to scream. Not a sound came out. As her mouth grew to an unnatural size, I could feel vibrations in the air, like standing next to a concert loudspeaker. The sliding glass door shattered, the shards fanning out towards me. The knife in my hand started shaking, but I managed to hold it. She stepped inside, her bare feet smearing ribbons of blood on the hardwood floor. She was coming for me, a constant vibration from an unnatural scream, tearing through my body. I had to try to call for help, and sprinted back into the kitchen. The light bulbs burst overhead, turning the room black. Still, not a single noise. A stray light from the streets outside made its way through the kitchen window, making the room drip with long, pale shadows. My aunt's collective plates rattled on the wall. Glasses along the kitchen sink were cracking and breaking. Empty bottles spilled onto the floor. Cabinet doors shaking back and forth, opening seemingly at random. An old recipe book fell from a countertop, the pages flicking back and forth. I pressed myself against the kitchen window, fumbling to get it open. She'd cornered me. Her mouth was wide open in that impossible scream, her body vibrating with machine-like intensity. tangled hair twisting and stretching, as if thrown about in a storm of its own. Her uneven eyes searched for me, twitching like insects. And still, she didn't make a single sound. There were no humming fans, no buzzing electricity, only a soft breeze outside the window. I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. I managed to stumble out of the kitchen window, stepping onto the sharp gravel path. I still held onto my knife like a comfort blanket. I didn't even bother to see if she followed me. I just ran. There was no time to get in the car. I ran into the woods, following a trail that would lead me to my neighbor. Soon, the rhythmic beat of my feet went quiet, my breath too. I tried to scream for help, but the sound was swallowed. She was right behind me. Long nails reached for me, fingertips touching the edge of my robe. And all around me, nothing but tranquil nature, unbothered by my terror. I was knocked to the ground, scraping my legs against the undergrowth. I slashed with my knife, trying to fight her, as a dainty hand picked up my keys from the side pocket of my robe. I rolled away, only to see the mess of tangled hair walk away. Her uneven eyes gave me a last look as she turned her back to me. She looked right through me without a care in the world. I got to my neighbor. My dirty feet muddied their floor, and by the time the police came, it felt like a waking nightmare. I made my statement, showered for the second time that night, and slept at a nearby motel as the police cleared my house. The next day, I assessed the damage. The house had been searched thoroughly, but nothing was stolen. Not too much was broken either. Seems she was looking for something specific, not trying to steal any valuables. The police were just as dumbfounded as I was, and I didn't report anything stolen. My insurance company would need an explanation. It was hard to explain why it looked like the house had been hit by a tornado from the inside without sounding insane. All the collective plates laid shattered on the floor. Poor Tugboat was so traumatized, he's since stopped singing. Going through the damages was heartbreaking, but it made me take notice of something peculiar. The garage had been searched as well. It was pretty much fine though, at least compared to the house. Among my boxes, I noticed a single item missing. The creepy plate I'd put aside for my aunt. The only one I didn't want in the house. The one with the young cartoon girl feeding the giant frog. It was gone. I guess I found the single collector who wanted it.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man who falls in love discovers that his girlfriend is hiding a deep secret. So, tonight, I'll be telling you how Millie made me sick.
Have you ever been really, really in love with someone? Where your every waking thought is concentrated solely on them, and the time when you're not with them feels like an eternity, counting down the minutes? Maybe you've felt that way. Maybe you haven't. I've had my fair share of relationships where I've had my head messed with over and over. Some of them liked playing mind games, others were abusive, some were hysterical. Some were great, calm and kind people that I was too broken to love. Then there's Millicent, or Millie. She was too good to be true. I've been part of the workforce for a few years now. I got my architecture degree at Cloud State, go Huskies, and moved out to Tomskog, Minnesota for an entry-level job. Small town, nice people, cheap apartments. When my little brother graduated from Minnesota State, they decided to have a party. He studied law, and we had a class full of future lawyers looking to get some stress out after taking the bar exam. 4 open apartments on the same floor, everyone invited. It was the kind of frat-fueled party frenzy you see in the movies. I can't believe some of the people I met there were aiming for positions of power. I met a guy there who swore he was going to be on the Supreme Court. He did a keg stand 10 minutes later. Legend. That's where I first met Millie. If I'm a solid 6, she would have been an 11. It was hard not to gawk. She had short blonde hair, a Cannibal Corpse t-shirt, and the kind of jeans that you just throw on to get out of the house. She could have been wearing a plastic bag for all I cared. Her almond-shaped face was so unique. She was absolutely gorgeous, with a deceivingly large smile. No piercings, not even earrings, no makeup. She made her way through the room, seemingly knowing everyone. A beer just magically appeared in her hand, and before I knew it, an hour had passed. I found myself standing beside her in the hallway. Music was thumping all around us, but all I could hear was my own pulse. I've never experienced anything like it before. Actual love at first sight. "You don't look like a lawyer," she smiled. "You a +1? Here with my brother." Is he the one slamming fisherman shots? Chatting up Kate in the kitchen? Allegedly. He absolutely was. He was on his 7th shot. Millie was delightful. Seeing that big smile up close was enough to break all the ice in the room. I felt like I could tell her everything, and we ended up talking for hours. I was completely sold. By the end of the night, we were making out in the backseat of my car like teenagers. I'll be the first to admit that I got a bit obsessed with her. I texted her every day, but she always seemed so busy. She hadn't graduated yet. She was getting a master's degree in applied statistics. She didn't seem like the kind of person who would spend hours cooped up in a room with a bunch of numbers, but everything about Millie was a mystery to me. We started dating regularly. Most of the time, we were just going out to eat and watch a movie. Nothing big. The night would always end the same, though, with a heavy makeout session. Sometimes more. She loved just hanging out at my place, even though she thought my scented candles was a bit much. I like sandalwood, sue me, but something was wrong. I've never been very sickly, but I started developing multiple ulcers, and I was losing a lot of weight. I've always had a bit of a frail physique, so losing more weight was dangerous. I could barely make it out of bed some days, and I remember once just sitting with a plate of spaghetti in front of me and trying to force myself to eat. It was too painful. I used to love pasta, but at that moment, it looked like I'd opened a can of worms. Of course, when I told Millie about it, she would always come right over. She took care of me for days at a time. Helped me cook, clean, make the bed, pretty much everything. She used to bring over this delicious yogurt that made me feel like an actual human for a while. We'd cuddle up and watch Friends for hours on end. And of course, plenty of making out. That goes without saying. But things just got worse. It got to the point where I had to be hospitalized and put on intravenous drip, as my body seemed unable to keep food down. My parents drove up to see me. All I could think about was Millie and how worried she'd be. Oddly enough, she didn't come see me despite me texting her about it. The doctor talked about a serious vitamin B deficiency. I was given plenty of pills and a strict dietary regimen. I'd be back on my feet and ready to get back to work in a couple of days, he promised. He also told me I had to stop smoking or I'd develop a serious emphysema. When I told him I didn't smoke, he just shook his head in disbelief. I was given some prescription painkillers. The day I was let out of the hospital, I met Millie in the parking lot. She seemed surprised that my brother was there with me, and the two of them met for the first time. It was an awkward meeting on both sides. No more than a, "Hey." That was it. Later that night, I called him about it. Millie had gone home for the night, but she promised she'd be back after class the following day. My brother hadn't seen us together before, so I figured he was just surprised. "I'm happy for you," he said, "but she's bad news." "You're just jealous," I laughed. "No, I mean, she has a reputation." "Come on. I'm telling you, she's weird. She only dates sick guys." Apparently she had dated 3 guys who were all very sick. 2 of them had to move out of state for special treatment. The 3rd moved back in with his parents for long-term care. The next time Millie came back to my place, we ended up making out in the bedroom. I couldn't shake the idea that she was dating me for a reason. I noticed I was having a hard time opening my eyes or pushing her away. I was so occupied with those loving little kisses. Finally, I forced myself away to get a good look at her. I kind of wish I hadn't. We stopped kissing suddenly and I opened my eyes. There was something wrong with her. Her eyes seemed larger and her pupils were so dilated that her eyes looked black. There was an odd shape to them similar to that of a frog. It was as if she was looking straight through me. Her mouth was round, leech-like, framed by her stretched, pillowy lips. Her teeth were longer and serrated. Her neck seemed elongated to the length of my forearm. We weren't actually tenderly kissing. She was holding me down. She had wrapped her legs around me like a tick and dug her spiky fingers into my back. A thin stretch of black smoke rose from her nose. It dawned on me. We had never just kissed or made out. She'd done this to me 100 times. She would lull me into this hypnotic state and then just suck the life out of me like a leech. She would blow white smoke into my lungs and then inhale black smoke back into herself. We would lie there, her breathing through my body for hours. I wouldn't remember anything but a pleasant night with a pretty girl, as my body was flooded with hormones and adrenaline, drained of whatever she needed from me. The painkillers must have made it easier for me to wake up. I had woken up like this before briefly, and every time she would just clamp down and make me forget again. Millie was inches away from my face. She held me down, but I managed to free my arm. I pushed my hand against her face. She shrieked. Not a scream, but a weird shriek. She was inhaling air through what sounded like 3 different windpipes, making a flute-like reverse yell. I was coughing up black smoke, and she tried to suckle up every puff. I managed to roll over, but she clung to me like a backpack. I felt that round mouth trying to attach to me, but I was moving too much. She was surprisingly light, but far stronger than me. I could feel her arms and legs around me clinging. She had 4 other limbs, long bone-like appendages, shiny from some kind of grease. She lifted us off of the floor, her arms and legs holding me like a cocoon. The round mouth got a hold of my neck, and for a split second, we were back on the bed, making out. Tender kisses and sweet whispers. And dash. But we weren't. I was being flooded with hormones, my head dipping in and out of consciousness. As I coughed up the final puff of black smoke, I felt my mind clearing. With my free arm, I grabbed the candle lighter on my nightstand. Maybe she didn't actually care about the scented candles so much as the lighter. I twisted my arm in a weird angle and turned on the lighter. I set her signature Cannibal Corpse t-shirt on fire. She let go and fumbled away. She tore off her shirt, and I could finally see her for what she really looked like. This wasn't the girl I'd seen at the party. Her face was longer and smoother. Her midriff was thin, stretchy, and ribbed like an earthworm. Her entire body vibrated with every shallow breath. 6 eyes in the middle of her torso, 2 columns of 3. They all blinked and moved independently. There were veins where they shouldn't be. Oddly shaped appendages, translucent skin. She was spasming, scrambling to look human. I had a few seconds before she regained her composure. I just kept lighting things on fire. The bed, the drapes, the carpet. With every lick of flame, she'd just shriek more. "I want you back!" her head cried. 3 windpipes, no longer trying to emulate the sound of a unified voice. "I'll be careful. You won't remember." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear her. The smoke alarm went off. Millie didn't even stand on her legs anymore. She folded her arms and legs into herself. Her head leaned back into her neck, fitting perfectly into an unnatural angle. A ball of Millie, held up by sticky bones coming out of her sides. The sounds were coming from her hollow neck. "I want to watch Friends," she cried, every vowel vibrating. "I want a snack. I want to cuddle." In a last-ditch effort to get to me, she forced herself through the fire. I locked myself in the bathroom. I'd rather die from smoke inhalation than from whatever she turned out to be. She kept pounding the door. A smatter of splats and thuds, but the door didn't budge. The fire alarm was going crazy, and soon the pounding stopped. She was gone. This was a few years ago, but I still can't kiss anyone with my eyes closed. I have nightmares about that black smoke filling up my body, then getting sucked out. It was like someone giving me mouth to mouth. Their air blowing out of my nose. That face breathing through me, like an extension of their lungs. Her flirty eyes, nothing more than a trick to get close to me. Pretty little lips wrapped around a monster's mouth, too large for a human cranium. I don't think I'll ever get over it. I can still feel my body aching to get back to her. My body loved Millie. Knowing what really happened and what she is the only defense I have from trying to find her again. It would be so easy to just let go, to let her have me. But I would be dead. But, of course, I have doubts. Maybe she really cared. Maybe she would be more careful if we tried again. See how easy it is? Never again. I'm telling you this as a warning. If someone seems too good to be true and makes you feel better than you've ever felt, maybe there's a reason. just open your eyes every now and then. Take a good look. Is this really...
Dad, I'm gonna be a ghost.
Mary has always been fascinated by the supernatural. It's been one of those ever-present interests that have persisted over the years, sometimes to a troublesome level. But this was different. She'd sat me down at the kitchen table and told me this like it was some sort of revelation. This was her telling me something serious and fundamental about herself. This was a change, a shift, something important that she wanted to involve me in, and I had no idea what she meant.
I'm stating my intention.
She said.
That's the first step.
Honey, what are you talking about? What steps? What are you...
I'm not here to argue, Dad. I'm just telling you what's gonna happen.
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. You're scaring me, Mary.
I'm taking active steps to ensure my place in the afterlife. It is no different than when Mom took me to church. I'm following my beliefs. I'm gonna be a ghost, a spirit, and the first step is to state my intention.
I don't know what to say, I sighed. I just want you to be happy. Please, I'm trying to understand.
You don't need to do anything. This isn't about you.
I know, honey,
I've said what I need to say, Dad. I just need your support.
So here's a little history lesson about Mary, or Miriam. She turned 19 last September and has been saving up to study at WVU next year. I'm helping her to the best of my ability, and she has the inheritance from her mom to go through, but it's still a bit of a struggle to make ends meet. Ever since she was a kid, Mary has been a bit of an oddball. Her mom had some personal problems and left us at an early age, only to pass shortly afterwards. There was an element of substance abuse, but Mary was never around for that. I've had full custody of her all her life. That Mary even remembered her mom taking her to church was an honest surprise. I don't have a lot of fond memories of Mary's mother. The good times we had is so far in the rearview mirror that I can barely see them. And when I do, they look pretty bleak. Mary's interest in the supernatural blossomed somewhere around her 6th birthday. When other girls wanted to be Disney princesses, Mary wanted to be a ghost. And not just the kind where you wear a white sheet with some holes for eyes, but pretty advanced stuff. Pale white foundation with dark eyes. She even asked me to get her those all-covering sclera contact lenses, but I put my foot down. She was still too young in my opinion. Even so, I probably bought her half a dozen Victorian-looking dresses so she could turn herself into a ghost for Halloween. It was her thing. Everything was ghost this and ghost that. I just figured she'd grow out of it, that she would be done with it and move on to something new. But that didn't really happen. It just matured in a way. Little cartoon ghosts turned into spooky Goosebumps type stories. Then TV shows and scary movies. Then reality shows with ghost hunters. Then horror movies and listening to mediums online. And as she reached her teenage years, her interest reached a whole new level. A step away from the fun and quirky to the dark and practical. And now that she is an adult, albeit young adult, she came to me with this absurd statement. That she, my Mary, was going to become a ghost. I subtly talked to some of her friends and checked her social media. It's hard keeping track of all the ways kids can express themselves nowadays. And yes, Mary is a grown woman. She can do what she wants. I've raised her right, but this just sounded wrong. Still, I didn't find any evidence of any kind of abuse or harm. Mary still posts wholesome memes about her favorite salty licorice candy or sharing upbeat inspirational TikTok videos. She's not that different from other girls her age, in many ways. She's a young adult with ambition and drive. So this conversation came out of nowhere. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept walking up to her door to hear if she was sleeping. It was hard to tell, and I didn't want to bother her. She deserved her privacy. Instead, he ended up pulling an all-nighter. I was on my tablet for hours, looking for signs of whatever she talked about. Actual, practical steps towards becoming a ghost. Something about stating your intention. My eyes had started to roll back into my skull when I finally found a whiff of relevant content. A series of video lectures from someone who called themselves a paranormal researcher. I looked them up. They're just some loon from some middle-of-nowhere town in Minnesota. Not exactly a leading expert in post-natural supermortem experience research, in my opinion. How is that even a field of study? Doesn't even make for a good acronym. But this video series was about the practical steps to becoming a ghost or vengeful spirit. It all sounded very official. They even had charts, and I figured this was where Millie had been inspired. First step, to state your intention, verbalizing it and putting it out there. They called it a path from realization to actualization. I figured that, hey, at least it was just the first step. And she'd come to me about it, so at least she trusted me enough to share this experience with me, whatever that entails. The second step was called anchoring, imprinting an item, piece of clothing, or symbol to your identity. Something simple to focus on at the last moment of life, which can become an anchor to your supermortem experience. The video reviewed ways of anchoring and things that make appropriate anchors. This was where the idea of haunted things come from, the anchor. The third and final step was by far the most disturbing. Emotional devastation. By combining an anchor with the intent to pass into a supermortem being, at the time of massive trauma, you could solidify a supermortem connection. The greater the scale and depth of the trauma, the more potent the reaction. They spoke about it so casually, like it was a high school science experiment. But what they were actually suggesting was nothing short of personal calamity. Murder, death, and tragedy. Was this really what Millie was aiming for? The next day when she was at work, I decided to go through her things. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I was only doing it to see if there was any more information about these steps and her ambition to follow them. What would it mean to Millie to experience emotional devastation? Was she planning something? What would that even look like? Thankfully, I didn't find anything overtly dangerous. No weapons, no goodbye notes, nothing out of the ordinary. Thank God. But there was the second step, an anchor. She had an obvious anchor, her silver cross. It was a necklace she'd worn since she was a kid, a memento from her mom. It was an obvious choice. She rarely, if ever, took it off. This put me in a dark place. If she was already at step 2, she could be on her way to step 3 at any moment. Maybe even right then and there. Look, I was in a bad mental space, and this whole situation wasn't making things better. Millie is her own person, and I support her to the core of my being, but I'm also a father, and that part of me doesn't go away. So I got in my car and I went to see her at work. I was exhausted, panicking, and confused. Didn't even notice that I parked in the handicapped space. I just stormed in. She was just working her shift. Didn't seem to have a worry in the world. Needless to say, we didn't have a very constructive conversation. She said some pretty harsh things, and not all of it was untrue. I didn't stay long. Millie and I had trouble talking after that. I tried to bring it up during dinner, but she just locked herself in her room with a takeaway salad from work. I tried messaging her, but she left me on red. I stood outside her room and asked her to talk to me. Nothing. I crashed hard that night. I was exhausted, physically and mentally. Millie still wasn't talking to me, and I had to recover from my all-nighter. I went to bed early, hoping it would all feel better in the morning. I wish that was all there was to it. A couple of bad days. But no, there was more. I woke up in the middle of the night. A single sliver of light peeked in through the bedroom door, poking me in the eye. I turned to face the door only to see Millie standing in the doorway. She just stood there, still in her work clothes. One hand on the doorknob, one hand holding something. Millie wasn't looking at me. She had this odd blank stare, like she was looking straight through me. Her mouth hung open, slack-jawed. She was panting, as if she'd been running. I looked at her. She looked back. There was this primal part of me that didn't recognize her. Something telling me that this wasn't Millie. This was something else. Something dark. After a while, she just up and left, closing the door behind her. I didn't even notice I'd been holding my breath until the door clicked. It felt like I'd stared down a lion. I hurried up to the bedroom door and reached for the handle. But I stopped myself. I'd never lock that door. Millie didn't lock hers and I didn't lock mine. It was a social contract, a show of trust. But it brought an important question to mind. How far was I willing to trust my daughter? I tried talking to her the next day, but I only had a few minutes before she went to work. I had work too, so I couldn't do much to keep her in the conversation. She just acted like she didn't know what I was talking about. There was no step 3. There was no big plan. She hadn't been at my door last night. No, no, no. If anything, I was the one being strange. That's how it sounded, at least. I had trouble staying focused at work. We'd been having some staffing issues, and some of us had to pick up the slack. Micah and his twin boys had been sick after their latest camping trip. Meanwhile, I could barely remember the last time Miri and I spent some quality time together. Between work and her diverging interests, there was little for us to talk about. And now there was even less. The following night, I considered locking my door. I had trouble sleeping. There was that gnawing thought in the back of my mind that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't wake up. If Miri was serious about this thing, she might do something stupid. I didn't like to think about it, but it was possible. Killing your dad might be one of the most emotionally devastating things one could do. If she really believed in these steps, this study, then there was no telling what she might do. But somewhere around midnight, I drifted off to sleep. And just like the previous night, it didn't last very long. I woke up by that stray light hitting my eyes again. I peeked out from the covers only to see Miri's silhouette against the hallway light. This time, she was holding a knife. "Miri?" I yawned. "Miri, what are you—"
Shut up.
She growled. "Honey, I'm just—"
Shut the fuck up.
She'd never spoken to me like that. Her hands were trembling, knees bent like she was ready to pounce. I found myself looking for something to shield myself with, but there was nothing. Maybe I could push her down with a pillow, or wrap her in a bedsheet. She took a step forward, but stopped herself. I reacted instinctively and shot out of bed, pressing myself against the wall. Miri just smiled. Her breathing was forced and rattled.
Just shut the fuck up. Let me do this.
She continued.
I want to do this.
"Honey, you have to talk to me." For a moment, she looked up at me.
You're right.
She said.
Not tonight.
And then she left. I followed her into the hallway, calling for her to stop this, that we should talk about this, that she was sick and that I wanted to help her. I just let every word I could find fall out of my mouth like a verbal waterfall, stumbling over my own thoughts along the way. In response, she plunged the kitchen knife straight into the wall, inadvertently cutting the cable to one of the hallway lights. I just stopped and watched her go back into her bedroom, then she locked her door. I sat with my phone for hours, contemplating what to do, who to call and what to say. I wanted Miri to get help, not jail time. I didn't know what to do. I looked at all kinds of sites relating to mental breakdowns and illness, but I couldn't find anything in particular. I kept coming back to this one thought. How far would I go to protect my daughter? I decided I'd do what little I could. I would call for help in the morning. Until then, I was watching her myself. I dragged a chair through the hallway, passed the knife in the wall, and sat down next to her locked door. I'd listen and I'd make sure she was okay. Then tomorrow, she could get help. I must have fallen asleep in that chair. I woke up to the sound of a startled shriek as Miri got out of the room in the morning. She wasn't prepared to see me there. I could see she was confused and a bit hurt. This was the Mary I knew and loved. I recognized her.
I can't deal with this, Dad.
She sighed.
Not like this.
We need to talk about last night.
I'm not doing this.
She picked up her bag and headed for the front door. I followed her. Miri, you're not walking out that door. We're dealing with this.
Aren't you late for work?
Miri, for God's sake! I slammed my hand on the kitchen table, rattling an empty dinner plate from last night. Miri just looked at me and shook her head.
I'm staying with a friend tonight.
She said.
Sort yourself out.
Miri! She was out the door, but I followed her down the driveway. She got in her car, locked the door, and ignored me. I pounded on the window, called out to her, and pleaded. She just backed out and left me there. I didn't even have my shoes on. I took a sick day, trying to find someone to call for help, trying to make sense of the symptoms, but I was hitting dead ends at every turn. Some sites called her schizophrenic. Others said it could be lead poisoning. One site just kept recommending overexposure therapy, whatever that is. I spent all day on the phone, but no one could tell me anything. They asked me to book a time for consultation and to take her in for examination. But as soon as I explained that she was legally an adult, the conversation stopped. It seemed that my options were to either call the police or get her to come voluntarily. Neither was a feasible option. I couldn't lose her. I tried calling Mary all day, but there was no response. She'd either blocked me or turned off her phone. She wasn't online on her socials, and she wasn't checking her email. I considered going to her job to talk to her directly, but I'd already tried that once. Going back there might get me barred forever. I tried to convince myself it was something temporary or a misunderstanding. I really tried, but the mental image of her standing there with a shaking knife in her hand had been burned into my mind. The greater the scale and depth of the trauma, the more potent the reaction. I watched the video over and over. Step 3, step 3, step 3. I fell asleep looking at my tablet that night, and for the final time, it didn't last long. I woke up again, but not to a strand of light touching my eyes. I woke up to the sound of thumping feet sprinting down the hall, heading straight for my bedroom. I wasn't prepared in the slightest. I thought Mary was staying with her friend. Instead, she burst through the door, knife in hand. She didn't even stop to breathe. She came straight at me. I rolled out of bed and tossed my covers at her. She just laughed. And not her signature Mary laugh, but something off. A cackling, hysterical laughter. It pulled at a cold nerve along my spine as my pulse raced. She was going to kill me. Step 3. As she untangled herself, I hurried into the hallway. I could hear Mary panting behind me, trying to catch up. She was so excited, manic joy. I threw myself into the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and turning the lock. I could hear her rush past the door, not even stopping to check. She had a plan. I didn't skip a beat. I scrambled for something to defend myself with. Not to hurt her, but maybe hold her down or keep her off. Tie her down or wrap her in a towel, anything. But I didn't get to think for long before I heard a thump at the bathroom window. I barely had the time to turn my head before she threw herself at it, breaking the glass with reckless abandon, throwing shards all over the floor, and falling haphazardly into the empty bathtub. I backed away, feeling a piece of glass digging into my big toe. Mary struggled to get up. She was still laughing. I backed out into the hallway, hearing the crunching noise of crackling glass as Mary got out of the bathtub. I shut the door and held it back, trying to give myself some time to talk to her. She threw herself at the door, slamming her head into it over and over. "Mary!" I called out. "Mary, what the hell are you doing?" Her laugh grew from maniacal to this deeply unsettling heaving. I could hear the thumping of her head reaching higher and higher. Seconds later, she was just making this awful droning noise, exhaling loudly against the door. The thumping stopped. "I'm calling the police, Mary. We need to deal with..." The door was torn off its hinges as Mary ripped it out of the frame. She looked about 3 feet taller, and her one arm had taken on a strange shape, like it had an extra joint. And her face, that wasn't her face anymore. I stumbled backwards. I felt a part of me grow cold as I realized I had a knife lodged deep into my left shoulder. Mary's long arm had shot out like a scorpion stinger. It was such a shock that my legs just gave out. My body wasn't responding anymore. My heart had had enough. I sank to the floor as she loomed over me. This wasn't my Mary, this was something else, and it was doing something to her just as much as it was to me. I was panicking, not knowing how to save either of us. That dark, sinking feeling where you realize just how fast you're running out of options.
"I'ma be a ghost, Daddy.
The thing grinned.
I'ma be a ghost."
My mind took me down an unsuspecting road. Akin to your life flashing before your eyes, a realization dawned on me. There had been someone else in my life that had followed the 3 steps to become a spirit. Maybe inadvertently. Mary's mother had said one last thing to me the day she lost custody. She had leaned forward, spat on my shoes, and growled.
"I'll haunt your booking nightmares."
She'd said so many horrible things to me over the years, I hadn't really thought about it. It was just one more thing in a long list of abusive language. But in the context of those steps, it could be considered an intention. An anchor? Well, the Silver Cross, it meant a lot to her, just as it did to Mary. An emotional devastation. Well, Pretty much everything about that woman was a tragedy, from the way she lived to the way she died. It was a long shot, but it might be her. And looking at the face of Mary's twisted image, I could recognize the malice. And as it pulled the knife from my shoulder to end me, I did what little I could. I tore the little silver cross from her neck, put it in my mouth, and bit down, breaking it into two distinct pieces. With a desperate shriek, she sunk the knife into me again. I recognized her anger from that day at the courthouse. This was the same woman who'd had Mary taken from her all those years ago. And with every beat of my heart, the world grew darker as I bled out on the floor. But unconsciousness is just like blinking. One moment you're there, one moment you're somewhere else. And I went from feeling bad to downright miserable. I was in a hospital recovering from 3 stab wounds, bandages on my shoulder, hand, and the side of my stomach. There was this parade of people asking to talk to me, a nurse, a doctor, and then a couple of police officers. I insisted that I had to see Mary and that I wasn't pressing charges. It was hard to explain how this could all be a misunderstanding and that I desperately wanted to see my girl again. They agreed to let me see her. Mary was wheeled in. Her feet were bandaged from severe glass cuts, so she had to use a wheelchair. There was an awkward silence as they allowed us to speak in private. When we were finally alone, she held my hand tight. I sighed with relief. "Why would you want this?" I asked. "Why would you want to be a spirit?"
It's... Dad, I'm sorry.
She took a deep breath and wiped a tear from her eye.
I just wanted to be like Mom.
Turns out Mary had been getting visits from her mom for years. A whisper in the night telling Mary to join her. Little hints and nudges. No wonder Mary had such an obsession with ghosts. She was experiencing one almost daily. She was wearing its anchor around her neck. With that gone, Mary had a clear image of what had happened. The nightly visits, the obsession. It was like a fog had cleared from her mind. Such a relief. Now Mary still has an interest in the supernatural to this day. That, if anything, will never change. But now she can explore that interest on her own terms, without any outside influence. And if she still wants to be a ghost, well, that's her choice. But I don't think a girl like Mary can go through with step 3. She really is a sweetheart. I don't want anyone to think otherwise. She's still going to WVU, and when all is said and done, I think we can get past this. But I wonder, why does she still lock her door at night?
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bump in the night. On tonight's episode, a woman who's been asked by her brother to be a bridesmaid at his wedding starts to notice the bride going insane over a dress. So, did you see it? Because I just seen the most beautiful dress.
When my little brother Jerry got married, I was asked to step in as a bridesmaid for his wife-to-be. The guest list was a little thin on the bride's side, and he figured it'd be a good bonding experience. His fiancée, Susie, came from a small rural community back in Minnesota and didn't have a lot of family. Jerry had briefly mentioned that she was an orphan, and that it was sort of an off-limit topic to bring up. Not that I'd planned to. Susie and Jerry had met during his studies at MSU, and they'd been together for over 6 years before they made it official. These were 2 people who were more or less married already. On their wedding day, I tried my best to cater to Susie's needs. She seemed a bit down, but I figured it was just cold feet. I didn't want to pressure her, so I held my tongue and observed. There were a lot of little things that stood out to me. The way she sighed at her reflection. The way her eyes sunk when she saw the flower arrangements. She didn't say anything, but there was a sort of lulling discontent on her face. As we waited for the dress, I found her pouting on an ottoman outside the bathroom. I joined her, giving her a curious look. "It's all beautiful," I assured her. "All of it. I can tell you put a lot of thought into it."
"It's not a big deal."
She smiled.
But it's not perfect. I mean, nothing is, but you know.
I get it, yeah. I nodded. Nothing's perfect.
It's not that, it's like,
She turned in her seat, facing me with a furrowed brow.
nothing is really truly beautiful. It's all right, but nothing is like I want it to be.
What would you change then? I asked. If you had more time?
That's just the thing.
She groaned.
I have no idea. It's just a feeling, you know?
There were a couple of surprises for Susie, though. Jerry had gone out of his way to make her happy. He had managed to track down her mother's wedding dress, something that had been put up for auction years ago when some of the family's estate was sold off to pay for Susie's education. He'd also made a bridal bouquet from the vivid pink flowers that grew in the backyard of her childhood home. These were all surprises, but he had backups on backups if she didn't like them. Green flags all around. When the dress arrived, Susie got this strange expression on her face. Like recognition, disbelief, and amazement all rolled into one. She cracked a smile and twirled around the room with it, hugging it like an old friend. It was certainly unique, an old-fashioned blend between a drop waist and empire cut. She held the dress up and stared at a mirror, speaking to me without looking away.
It's not perfect, but it's getting there.
She smiled.
It's almost like I picture it. I feel it.
I handed her the bridal bouquet, watching the pink petals reflect in her eyes.
I really do feel it. Right here.
She put her hand on her stomach, smiling from ear to ear. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The walk down the aisle, the exchanging of vows. They walked out of the church to a church organ rendition of Tom Jones's Chills and Fever. That was also the first dance they shared at the reception. While my focus was on Jerry, I couldn't help but to look over at Susie every now and then. I caught her looking at her reflection a couple of times. She'd peer over the counter of the open bar and stare at herself in the mirror wall. I also noticed a bit of hesitance to throw the bridal bouquet. She couldn't keep her eyes off the pink petals. It's like she was mesmerized and wanted to keep it to herself. All in all, it turned into a good night. Lots of laughs, drinks, and dancing. But I couldn't help but to notice something strange in Susie's eyes. A light that wasn't there earlier that day. A couple of days turned into weeks and life went on. I forgot about Susie and her wedding dress. That is, until Jerry called me up. He wanted to have lunch and catch up. Jerry and I have always had a good relationship, but we didn't really spend time on our own. We mostly just met for big events. To have him willingly seek me out rang some alarm bells. I met him at a cafe downtown. I had a sandwich. He got nothing. Not even coffee. I could tell he was trying to keep a brave face, but there were worrying signs. I caught him yawning, and he had a slight shake to his hands. Something was clearly bothering him. I tried to get a read of him with some small talk, but it wasn't long until the conversation took a turn.
I want to talk about the wedding,
He said.
Did Susie say something when she saw that dress?
She loved it, I said, chewing on my sandwich. Really loved it.
Yeah, but did she say anything? Anything strange?
She mentioned it not being perfect. I nodded. But getting there, you know?
Getting there?
Yeah, like... I shrugged. I didn't know how to explain it. In fact, as I looked back on it, I had no idea what she meant. It felt like an off-the-shoulder comment, but maybe there was more to it. Jerry held his hands up.
Look,
He sighed.
we've been having issues.
Turns out their honeymoon didn't turn out as magical as one was led to believe. Susie had been obsessing over that wedding dress all week long. Jerry had once walked in on her wearing it in the bathroom, crying over how she wouldn't get a chance to wear it again.
She said it made her feel beautiful,
He explained.
and how rare that was.
Not wanting to see her sad on the first week of their life together, Jerry had just gone along with whatever Susie asked of him. She'd been wearing that dress pretty much all day long, even sleeping in it a couple of nights. For passers-by, it had been an amusing oddity, but Jerry was getting worried. Susie was having trouble keeping it together, and ever since they got back home, her behavior had taken a turn for the worse. Jerry had trouble talking about it. He kept touching his face as if trying to hide what he was saying. He'd find Susie getting up at night to put the dress on, twisting and turning in front of the mirror to see herself at different angles. But it was more than just the dress. She'd begun making modifications. The dress wasn't perfect, and she was obsessed with this idea of making it what it could be. It started with hand-weaving a couple of blue threads into the edges of the dress. But lately, she'd turned to accessorizing, turning away from the dress and onto herself.
The perfect makeup, the right shade of nail polish, that kind of thing.
Jerry explained.
I've seen her looking up tattoo places around town. I don't know what to say.
Look, you married her. I smiled. In sickness and health. Just be there for her, Jerry.
I'm all about that.
He nodded.
But this ain't normal, and I don't know where it's gonna stop.
Jerry leaned back, dragging his hands across his face.
She scares me.
I got a couple of updates over the next few days. Susie had changed her hair, her nails, and she was wearing her makeup in an unusual way. Jerry had trouble explaining it. He had managed to dissuade her from getting her face tattooed, but just a day later, he had to stop her again. This time from scarring her own face with a nail clipper. It was getting serious. We texted back and forth, trying to figure out what to do and who to talk to. It was obvious that Susie was having trouble that we couldn't begin to understand. Something had just snapped when she put that dress on. The same dress she'd obsessed over all her life. The one exactly like the one her mother had worn. Which got me thinking, what had really happened to her parents? Not even Jerry knew. It was the one thing that Susie refused to talk about. Then Jerry stopped responding. It was sudden, so I decided to pay him a visit. In all the years that he and Susie had been together, I'd never heard of them having this kind of issue before. I had no idea what to expect. These two were like the baseline picture of what a healthy relationship should look like, and all of a sudden, it had just collapsed. I drove by their home, a row house in a calm residential area. It didn't take long to see that something was wrong. There were neighbors outside and a squad car on the driveway. People were about to scatter back to where they came from, leaving only Jerry and 2 police officers. They were finishing up as I approached. I caught the glimpse of a conversation ending with Jerry being asked to reconsider something, and that was that. The moment I approached, he gave me a hug. I'd never been hugged like that before, like he was holding on for dear life. He peered inside his home as if checking for Susie and told me the story with a hushed tone. Susie had gone off the rails. She'd torn out chunks of her hair and chewed dirt to stain her mouth with the right color. The final straw had been trying to staple her ears to the side of her head, and that's where Jerry had intervened. Things had gone from bad to worse.
She says I'm keeping her from perfection,
He said.
She says I'm holding her back.
Susie had attacked him. Thrown things, screamed, broken furniture. She had wreaked havoc on their home, completely remorseless. That's why the police were there, the neighbors had called them. But instead of pressing charges, Jerry had dismissed them. He was going to get Susie help personally. He didn't want her to end up in a cell. She needed treatment, and he needed my help to move her. As we stepped inside their home, I could tell it hadn't been a little spat. There was broken glass strewn across the floor, a broken chair, and every painting had been thrown across the room. Susie was sitting on the living room couch in what remained of her torn wedding dress. It had been stained with patches of green, brown, and blue. She had large red bald patches on her head, and she'd applied all kinds of makeup seemingly at random. She was slowly dancing with her arms like she was playing an invisible harp.
She said something about her movements being part of her new aesthetic.
Jerry explained.
She's been like that for the past 20 minutes or so.
I took a few steps closer, making sure not to interrupt her movements. They were choppy and artificial, like a buffering video. She had one eye fixed on her hands and the other eye moving at random. It was impossible to tell if she was paying attention to us. If I hadn't known it was her, there'd be no way to recognize her. Apart from all the things she'd done to herself, she'd also lost a lot of weight. Still, she seemed happy. Maybe even happier than she'd been at the wedding. Jerry moved up behind her and slowly put his hands around her torso. With a little nudging, she got the message and stood up, careful not to miss any arm movements. I moved ahead, making sure there was nothing in the way. It felt like moving a glass figurine. We had no idea what could break her. We managed to get her in the car. Jerry asked me to follow in my own car, but I refused. I didn't want to leave him alone with her, especially not going down a highway. I ended up behind the wheel as Jerry and Susie stayed in the back seat. He had a place in mind, one he'd been in contact with over the past week or so. They were mostly for emergencies, but there'd been nothing but luck keeping this breakdown from causing serious damage. I didn't want to think about what would have happened if she'd been in the kitchen, by the knives. We'd been driving for about 20 minutes when I suddenly heard a snap. Then another. Looking over, I saw Susie furiously pulling at her fingers, almost tearing them out of their sockets. Jerry threw himself at her.
No!
She cried.
They need to be the same length. They need to be the same.
By the time we got to the address Jerry had given me, the back seat was pandemonium. Susie was screeching like an animal, scratching and tearing at Jerry to get away. I saw two men running out of a nearby building to help us. A door opened and Susie was grabbed. She screamed at them to let her go, to let her fix her fingers, and Jerry screamed
Stop
back.
now!
I barely understood what happened until I was alone in the car, watching Jerry and two men in white uniforms take Susie away. A couple minutes later, I got a text saying I was good to go, and a thank you. Coming home later that night, I took a long look at myself in the mirror. I tried my best to figure out what Susie was obsessing about, but there was no logic to it. Sure, I have my flaws, and she did too, but whatever she was doing wasn't helping. What kind of ideal was she really pursuing? I talked to Jerry just before I went to bed. Susie was in good hands for the time being, and he was at home, sleeping alone for the first time in years. I could tell it was bothering him.
I don't know what she's looking for.
He sighed.
It's like she wants something perfect, but she just destroys herself.
Maybe she's got another idea of what's perfect and what isn't, I said.
Maybe, yeah.
He agreed.
But some of the stuff she says, it's like, it's not just changing your nails or your hair. She says things sometimes when she thinks I don't hear.
Like what?
Like,
He took a deep breath. I could tell he was in the bathroom. Had he been crying?
like she's wishing for more arms. Or to be taller. Or to be transparent.
Things were quiet for a couple of days after. I reached out to Jerry, but I didn't get a lot back. A quick text every now and then to tell me he was doing okay. Susie was getting the help she needed, but she wasn't improving. At least we'd stopped her from getting worse. I thought about it a lot. Everything had changed the moment she saw that dress. Sure, it had been unique, but what was so special about it? I asked Jerry's permission to ask around and show a few pictures of it. There were also a few cuts that Susie had discarded, which I could use to show off the fabric. I talked to a couple of professionals around town. Most of them didn't have a lot to say or dismissed me entirely. It took me half a day before I found this old woman at a hidden-away private tailor downtown that I could get some answers. They were about to close, but she took some time out of her day to help. She had never seen that cut before, despite having worked with wedding dresses for close to 40 years. It had to be a custom job. But what seemed to vex her the most was the fabric.
It's not charmeuse or Georgette.
She pondered.
A sateen? No.
She compared it to a couple of her own fabric samples, but came up with nothing. We were about to give up when she caught a glimpse of her husband having a cigarette outside. She got an idea and asked my permission to set the fabric on fire. Apparently, that's a way you can get a rough idea about the nature of the textile. Now, this piece of fabric was just a small square, no bigger than the palm of my hand. But she borrowed her husband's lighter, put the square down, and set it on fire. The reaction was immediate. It bulged in the middle as a dozen little branch-like extremities poked out of it. They grew, twisting and turning like a dying snake. The fabric turned from a bright white to a dark blue with a metallic sheen. The branches grew thicker, reaching further and further out, morphing into a petal-like flat surface. By the time the whole square was consumed by fire, it had spread out like a chemical grenade had gone off. At a distance, it was almost pretty, like a blue sunflower. She didn't have the slightest idea what it was supposed to be. The only thing she knew was that she wanted it out of her store, and that she needed to wipe down every surface it had touched with chlorine. I had the image of that fabric twisting and turning under the flames in my head for a couple of days. It was something animalistic about it, like a living, breathing thing. I thought about calling up Jerry to ask for more scraps that I could ask someone else about, maybe a chemist. But I didn't get the opportunity. It was a Thursday around 2 a.m. Jerry called me, breathing heavily into the phone. He'd been running. Apparently there was an issue with Susie. She'd gotten out and they needed people to help find her. That's all he knew. There was no question about it. Of course I was gonna help. I met up with Jerry and made my way out to the mental health facility we'd dropped her off at. We drove past the sign with the Hatchet corporate logo and got stopped at the entrance by an armed guard. Jerry explained that we were there to help with the search, and we were let in. We were to take a detour from the main entrance, though, so I only caught a glimpse of what was happening in there. Whatever Susie had done, it was big news. 2 ambulances, several police vehicles, and about half a dozen unmarked black vehicles. They didn't even have license plates. I think I spotted something splayed out on the asphalt on stretchers, either wounded people or dead. We were guided to the staff parking lot around the back. A handful of other vehicles were parked and about 24 people surrounding them, mostly volunteer staff. They were handing out search locations, shouting out rules, and telling people who to pair up with and how. But Jerry wasn't having it. In the flashing red and blue lights, I could tell he was having second thoughts. He turned to me and lowered his voice.
I don't think she'd just run into the woods.
He said.
I think she's going home.
Then why didn't you stay home?
Not our home.
He said, shaking his head.
The place where she feels most home.
There was a secret picnic spot not too far from there. It was where Jerry had proposed. A large field, covered in flowers, with a single 4-bench picnic table that had been overgrown since the early 90s. The place was abandoned, but it was one of Susie's favorite spots in the world. And maybe it was just a hunch, but that's where Jerry felt that she was going. All this talk of beauty might have gotten him thinking about it. We had to go off-road and park on a slope, walking up a hill in the dark. There was a full moon out, but the light was covered in a spotty cloud cover. The sky was passing so fast that you felt like you were moving even when standing still. We made our way through an overgrown trail, past a dense pine forest, and saw the woods open into a clearing. And there she was. I saw her from about 200 feet away, standing on a picnic table, staring at the moon. She'd gotten her dress back, but it was torn and disheveled beyond repair. It had gone from a majestic wedding dress to something that barely covered her knees. It was torn, dirty, frayed, and bloody, much like Susie herself. She barely had any hair left. Her eyes were sunken into her head, making her whole face seem smaller. Her chapped lips were drawn back into a permanent half-smile, straining against the shape of her cranium. Her fingers were broken and bruised, and she stood on the tip of her toes, doing a balancing act as she slowly moved her arms around. All without rhythm, rhyme, or reason. This was beyond a pattern. It was surreal, and the image has seared into my head. It still comes to mind when I catch some abstract dance number on TikTok, and when it does, it gives me chills. But that night, I didn't just have chills. I was scared. I'd seen a lot of things in my life up until that point, but there was just something unreal about this. It wasn't just madness. It was commitment. Susie knew something we didn't. We approached her slowly. As we got closer, her head turned to us, her eyes darting between me and Jerry. They seemed to move independently of one another. I could see a crack in the corner of her mouth as her involuntary smile twisted into a full-grown grin.
Susie, we gotta go home.
Jerry pleaded.
I don't want you getting hurt.
She turned her back on him, looking out into the fields beyond. Whatever she saw there was something far more interesting than what I and Jerry could offer. Still, he didn't give up. He begged her to step down from the table and come to him. He talked about the adventures they'd had and the challenges they'd overcome. And yet, Susie didn't budge. I wasn't really paying attention to what Jerry was saying. I was looking the same way as Susie. What was she really seeing? Was there something there? You know the way a ray of light can catch your eye? A reflection off a piece of jewelry or a watch, and how it can sting your eye out of nowhere. That's how I felt. I followed Susie's eyes and I saw something. Not in the night sky, but in the tree line on the other side of the glade. Looking at it stung me. It burned. It was uncomfortable, much like a ray of unwanted sun. I recoiled and regained my balance. Jerry stopped in his tracks, looking over at me. I nodded that I was fine. He looked back at Susie, but I tapped him on the shoulder. He turned his attention back to me. "Don't look," I wheezed. "Don't look." But it was impossible not to. Although it burned me, I couldn't help but to look. There was something moving towards us. I couldn't see a shape because it had none. It was like looking at an uncomfortable feeling and having it bury into your head. I could only look at it in short bursts, but I still couldn't help myself. Susie, on the other hand, was staring at it. She didn't dare close her eyes. As her hand movements relaxed and slowed, I saw her shoulders slump.
They think I'm beautiful.
She cried.
They'll make me perfect.
Susie, what are you...
They can help you too.
She sniffled.
We can both go.
Then she turned to us, her eyes trembling like a cold dog. She smiled at me with missing teeth, revealing a bloody tongue. Her left eye found me.
You too.
She said.
You can come too.
Jerry not only stopped, but stepped back. He could feel it too. We were being threatened. There was no way Susie could overpower us both, but that wouldn't matter. She wasn't the threat here, and we didn't even understand what was. But looking across the field, I could tell it was coming closer, leaving a trail of flattened grass as it beelined towards us.
Come on, Jerry.
She laughed.
Hurry.
He fell backwards, covering his face with his hands. Something in me told me that I ought to do the same, but I didn't. Instead, I turned back to Susie. Whatever was moving out there had reached her, looming over her like a storm cloud. I could feel it. The longer I looked at it, the more complex the sensation. At first, it was like a burning pain behind the eyes, leaving a cold and exposed nerve. That nerve tingled with a resonance, painting pictures in my mind like a seismograph. It was happening faster and faster, leaving only fleeting impressions of a being. It had arms longer than bone and skin. It knew words that gave way to thought. It was perfect, beautiful, and real. Maybe the realest thing I'd ever felt. A transcendent something that had gone past the physical and the immediate, instead surviving as an ideal, as the most beautiful thing you could imagine. Fleeting, ever-changing, ever-inviting, and impossible to put into form. This was what Susie had been chasing. She had made herself a mockery in an attempt to create something that couldn't be, and it had recognized her efforts. Looking at Susie for one final time, she screamed with ecstatic joy. And in the blink of an eye, it happened. Her flesh unraveled into a transparent jelly. Her arms bent, snapped, and unfurled into frayed knots, eyes glowing a pure white as her tongue boiled behind crackling teeth. I saw her head twist like a balloon in a storm as her spine left her body. And she laughed. She laughed and cheered to the very end, overjoyed as to come what may. Then she was just gone. Dress and all, leaving nothing but a spatter of sizzling stains on the edge of the picnic table. Something turned to me. Even without looking at it, I could feel it looking. Despite everything in me screaming to look away and to deny, there was a part of me that was drawn in by what I'd seen in Susie. Her joy was as pure could get. I wanted to accept it, to explore it. The picture in my mind was growing clearer, and I remember feeling this unearthly sense of peace. I didn't just belong, I was meant to be, and I was beautiful. But luckily, Jerry was there. He dragged me down, screaming at me to snap out of it. I hadn't even noticed it, but I was laughing. I had been staring at my hands, as if they held some kind of answer. What was I doing? Realizing how close I'd been to losing control, I just hugged my brother and cried. He was inconsolable. We could barely form words as whatever presence we'd felt dissipated, leaving us alone in the dirt. Ugly, imperfect, and ourselves. Over the weeks to come, we'd get a bit more context as to what had happened. 2 caretakers had mysteriously disappeared, and a third had been found dead in the break room. The death was described as an accident, but from what eyewitnesses have been telling me, he died in a way that can only be described as a man going through a full-body microwaving. Susie, well, she was just reported missing. What else was there to say? There was no sign of her, and Jerry couldn't very well say that she evaporated. Instead, he was tortured for weeks, asked to keep his chin up and getting constant reminders that hope was always the last thing to die. They didn't know any better. They didn't know that hope died with a laugh. I think back on that night a lot. I wish it had had a face. I wish I could visualize this singular thing, to put into words what this looked like. But it's impossible. There are no words to describe it. Sometimes in the shower, I try to make up new words for it. They come naturally to me, but I sound completely mad. Nowadays, when I look in the mirror, I don't really see flaws. Not like I used to. I don't see my nose as a little crooked, or my teeth as a little yellow. No, it's bigger than that. It's the sense of being stuck in something static and unchanging. Confined. I find myself dreaming of being this cosmic jellyfish, floating formlessly through nothing, barely held together by anything but vague remains of what I was supposed to be. I'm sorry. It's strange. It's